My father always said the dinner table was where a family revealed its true character. He said it proudly, the way men say things that sound like wisdom but function as warnings. What he never acknowledged was that our table had always been the place where he and my brother did their most efficient damage, and that I had simply never given them the satisfaction of letting it show. That changed on a Thursday evening in October. We were at a private dining room inside one of Austin's most expensive steakhouses, 12 people around a long mahogany table, the kind of room my father reserved for clients he needed to impress, or family occasions he needed to frame as impressive. The occasion tonight was both, celebrating my brother Drew's promotion to Executive Vice President of Harwell Precision Manufacturing, and introducing his fiancée, Kitten, to the company's inner circle. Along the table sat a mix of regional clients, longtime suppliers, and 4 men I didn't fully recognize. Guests my father had mentioned vaguely, something about a defense-related contract Drew had been chasing for nearly 2 years. I had been invited the way you invite someone to a christening you expect them to ruin by existing, technically included, positioned carefully at the far end, close enough to count but far enough to manage. My mother had called 2 days earlier and said, in that particular tone of hers that sounds like an invitation but lands like a summons, that it would mean a lot to the family if I came and kept things civil. I told her I would. I was 30 years old, Drew was 34, the gap between us had never really been about age. When my father built Harwell Precision from a regional machine shop into a $30 million precision manufacturing company, he built it with Drew in mind from the beginning. Drew got the office next to my father's the week he graduated. He got the title, the salary, the company card. He got the narrative, driven, ambitious, carrying on the legacy, while the actual work of carrying anything was distributed more quietly to the people around him. I got the other version of the story. The one where I was the daughter who couldn't handle college pressure, who walked away from everything the family had built, who joined the Navy on what everyone called an impulse and came home quieter and harder to read and still, somehow without anything to show for herself. I never corrected any of it. My work operated under layers of federal confidentiality agreements that made explanation both impossible and frankly beside the point. The people whose opinions I cared about already knew exactly who I was. My family's opinion had stopped mattering somewhere in the middle of my second deployment. I wore a dark blazer over a simple blouse. I sat where they told me to sit. I watched the room the way I had been trained to watch rooms, tracking movement at the edges, noting who listened and who performed, identifying the people who were doing the most thinking while saying the least. Directly across from me sat a man introduced earlier as Victor Hale, VP of Procurement Strategy at Meridian Dynamics. He was somewhere in his early 50s, silver-templed, composed, wearing a suit that cost more than Drew's but announced it less. He had barely spoken during the first hour. When he did ask questions, they were the kind that were actually careful listening, wearing a different coat. I noted him immediately. He was the most interesting person in the room, and also the most dangerous, in the way that quiet, attentive people are always the most dangerous. I knew Meridian Dynamics. I kept that knowledge exactly where it was. Drew clinked his glass at 8:15, and the room organized itself around him the way rooms always did around my brother. He had a genuine talent for that, for making the air feel like it had been waiting for him specifically. I just want to take a moment, he began, already warm with bourbon and self-satisfaction, to say how grateful I am for this company, for my father who built something worth inheriting. Polite applause. My father smiled at the head of the table. And for Caitlin, Drew reached for her hand, for agreeing to take on this whole family. Easy laughter, cooperative and warm. I watched him ride the warmth and then, exactly when I expected it, decide to use it as a runway. The only one who maybe didn't inherit the ambition gene, casual, smiling, turning his gaze down the table toward me, is my little sister Quinn. Stand up, Quinn, let people see you. I did not stand. She's modest, he said pleasantly. That's a generous word for it. A short chuckle at his own setup, Quinn decided sophomore year that she knew better than the rest of us. Dropped out, joined the Navy for a while, came back and has been doing something with computers. He spread his hands in mock curiosity. Freelance consulting, I think. Something she can do from home? My mother added from beside my father brightly, she's very independent. Very independent, Drew confirmed. He looked at the business partners along the table, which is the polite way of saying she's turned down every offer my father made to bring her into the company. No salary, no title, no office. She has genuinely made an art form out of not participating. He raised his glass in my direction. But family is family, we're proud of her. The toast looked from a distance like warmth. I picked up my water glass. I did not look at my father. I had given up that reflex years ago, the instinct to look at him and wait for some signal that he would step in and correct it. He never did. He was watching Drew with the quiet approval of a man watching his investment perform. I kept my face still and absorbed the impact the way you absorb impacts after enough of them, not by going numb, but by understanding that pain and reaction are not the same obligation. I allowed myself one glance across the table. Victor Hale was looking at me, not unkindly, with the expression of someone who has just heard a name and is fitting it somewhere in a file he has carried for a long time. He reached slowly for the inside pocket of his jacket, with the unhurried movement of a man being very deliberate about appearing casual. His phone appeared on his lap, his fingers moved once. He looked at the screen for less than 3 seconds. He placed the phone face down on the table next to his bread plate. He picked up his wine glass, he did not drink from it. I looked back at my plate. Drew moved on to the contract. He described the Meridian partnership with the specific confidence of someone who has rehearsed something so many times that he has started believing his own rehearsal is the original. The components Harwell Precision manufactured were precisely what Meridian's deed-adjacent project required. He had personally driven the negotiations to the threshold of a letter of intent. He called it transformational. He called it generational. He called it the kind of deal that rewards the people who stayed committed and did the work. Victor Hale nodded at intervals with the particular measured quality of a man who has already made a decision and is simply moving through the correct sequence of steps before acting on it. Drew turned back to me once more. He said something about how I could have been sitting on the right side of this table if things had gone differently. He said it with the easy magnanimity of someone offering grace from a position of complete safety. It was the kind of statement designed to look like generosity and function like a verdict. I said nothing. Victor Hale excused himself from the table at 8:42. He said quietly that he had a call to take, and he walked through the heavy door at the back of the dining room before Drew had completed his next sentence. Drew glanced at the empty chair, frowned briefly, then refilled his bourbon and kept going. I watched the door. I had spent years making decisions in environments where the cost of misreading a situation was not embarrassment, but something more permanent. I had learned to distinguish the uncertainty that resolves itself from the uncertainty that is about to become something else entirely. Victor Hale had left this room to confirm information. He would come back different. People who are methodical always come back different once they have confirmed the thing that rearranged their understanding. I already knew what he was confirming. I knew because I had been in his position before, sitting across from a name, running it, watching the gap close between who you assumed someone was and who they actually were. I ate my dinner. I said very little. I watched my brother talk about himself for 23 minutes with the focused, relentless energy of a man who genuinely cannot sense when a room has tilted away from him. He described the Harwell manufacturing floor expansion. He described his vision for the company's next decade. He described what winning the Meridian contract would mean for the family legacy, and everyone along the table listened with varying degrees of attention, and Caitlin twice touched his arm lightly in that particular way that means slow down. And he did not slow down. Victor Hale returned at 9:05. He sat down with the same composed quietness he had carried into the room, but the texture was different, the uncertainty was gone. He poured himself water, unfolded his napkin, and looked at me once. Brief, direct, containing nothing that required a response. I gave him nothing back, just my usual expression, level and patient, the one I had developed over years in places that rewarded stillness. He turned to my brother. Drew, he said without preamble, I want to ask about the cybersecurity compliance layer on the Meridian subcontract. My brother turned with the reflex attentiveness of someone eager to demonstrate competence. Of course. What specifically? The vendor firm holding that position, Harwell Secure Systems. Victor folded his hands on the table. Are you familiar with their current authorization status? Drew nodded with the confidence of a man who recognized the name from documents he had not read carefully. Our legal team has been coordinating throughout the process. The documentation looks solid on our end. There's a renewal provision in the vendor agreement, Victor said. It requires direct authorization from the company's founder. It's a named party requirement under the DoD compliance framework, not something the legal teams can route around. He paused. I wasn't aware until this evening that the founder was at this table. The private dining room went still in the way that happens when people understand the conversation they are witnessing is more important than anything they might contribute to it. My brother's eyes moved from Victor to me with the slow, disbelieving trajectory of a compass needle, being pulled to a north it had no intention of finding. Quinn Harwell founded Harwell Secure Systems, Victor said. He looked at me. 7 years ago, if I have my records right. 7 years ago, I said, the year after I was honorably discharged. Victor turned back to Drew. His expression was professionally kind in the specific way of someone delivering a difficult fact efficiently and without embellishment. Without the founder's signed renewal, Drew, the contract structure doesn't hold. I want to be direct about that because I think it's important you understand it clearly. My brother stared at me. The dinner table, which he had controlled effortlessly for 2 hours, had tilted so completely away from him that he could not yet locate his footing on it. Quinn, he said my name the way you say a word when you need it to be a lever, lower, shorter, stripped of everything decorative. You can just sign the renewal, that's just paperwork. I haven't decided to sign it, I said. What do you mean you haven't decided? I mean I haven't decided. My father stood up. He moved to the center of the conversation the way he moved to the head of every table, by physical positioning and the implicit assumption that his arrival would settle things. Victor, he said, measured and authoritative, the voice of a man who had been in business for 30 years and knew how to project control even when he did not have it. I want to assure you this is a private family matter and does not represent any instability in our vendor relationships. I can have our legal team on a call with your compliance office first thing tomorrow morning. I appreciate that, Victor said, but the authorization is contractual, not a preference. Your legal team can't substitute for the founder's signature. He looked at me with the straightforward respect of a colleague. Quinn, I want you to know Meridian's position toward your firm hasn't changed. The infrastructure compliance review your team completed for us last year was the most thorough assessment we've received from any vendor in a decade. Whatever you decide about the renewal, we'll work accordingly. He folded his napkin, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and shook my father's hand with the brief professional gravity of a man ending a meeting rather than leaving a dinner party. He came around the table and stopped beside me. I stood. I look forward to hearing from your office, he said quietly enough that only I could hear it. Then he walked out. The door closed. My brother was on his feet. I'm not sure when he had stood. He was looking at the space where Victor had been and then looking at me, and his face had the unguarded quality of someone from whom the floor has been removed without warning. How long? He said. 7 years, I said, I told you. You sat here and let me. He stopped, his jaw worked. You let me stand up there and say all of that in front of him and you knew. You chose every word you said tonight, I said. I didn't let you do anything. My father's voice came in underneath it. Quinn, this is not the place to. Drew chose the place, I said. I looked at my father, which I had not done directly in some time. He chose to make my career a topic at a business dinner. I'm just finishing the conversation he started. Caitlin had gone very still. The other men along the table found surfaces to study that were not my brother's face. Drew leaned forward, dropped his voice to the register he used when he wanted to make something feel private in front of an audience. You would actually tank a deal that affects this entire family because I said something at dinner? I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the word freelance, delivered with that particular softness designed to make it sound like a euphemism for failure. I thought about my mother's voice, very independent. I thought about my father watching Drew perform and nodding with the slow satisfaction of a man whose investment is paying off, while the actual record of my last 7 years sat in federal contractor databases he had never once thought to look at. "I'm going to go," I said. I picked up my bag. I left the copy of the vendor renewal draft on the table. I had brought it for a different purpose, and it no longer served that purpose or any other. I looked at my father once, briefly. Then I walked to the door. My mother said my name as I reached it. She said it with the specific inflection she had used my entire life, the one that expected me to stop, turn, and comply. I had complied with that inflection for 20 years. I walked through the door. The main dining room was warm and quiet and entirely indifferent to what had just happened behind me. I moved through it without hurrying, out through the entrance, and into the October air, which was cool and clean the way Texas nights get in fall, when the heat finally releases and the sky goes wide and dark. My phone began ringing before I reached my car. My brother's name on the screen. I drove home. He called 4 more times that night. I listened to the road and the radio and said nothing to either of them. I made tea in my dark kitchen, standing at the counter without turning on the lights, looking out the window at the backyard for a long time. The thing about staying quiet for years inside a situation is that when the quiet finally matters, you don't have to manufacture it. You already live there. I sent one email before I went to bed. To my COO, asking her to schedule a call with Victor Hale's procurement office for the following Tuesday. The updated compliance terms were workable. The contract could move forward. It moved forward as it turned out, with Meridian identifying an alternative manufacturing partner for the components Harwell Precision had been positioned to supply. That process took 6 weeks. My brother called 7 times during those 6 weeks. I answered once, on the 4th call, and listened to him explain at length that I had cost our father a transformational opportunity out of spite, and that whatever point I was trying to make, I had made it at the expense of people who loved me. I let him finish, then I asked him one question. When he had stood at that table and described my career to his business partners, had he considered, even once, whether he had the full picture? He didn't answer. "That's the whole thing, Drew," I said. "That's all it ever was." I hung up and went back to work. My company's 4th federal contract renewal processed without incident that December. I drove to my parents' house once in January unannounced. My mother answered the door. We looked at each other in the threshold for a moment. The way people look at each other when the script they've been using for decades has finally exhausted its usable pages. She didn't mention the dinner. I didn't either. I told her I was going to take some time before coming to family events, and that I hoped she understood, and that I was fine. She nodded. Her eyes were different than they had been at the steakhouse, less certain, less ready to perform. There was something underneath them that I recognized, because I had felt it myself a long time ago, standing at the edge of a decision I had put off for too long. I drove home through clear January light, the city flat and bright around me, and I felt, for the first time in years, like someone who had finally stopped waiting for a verdict from a court that had never had jurisdiction over her.